Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 815 for the 19th of May, 2024. Richard Saunders coming to you this week from the temporary studios here in Oakland, California. Coming up on this week's show, for crying out loud, it's Kat McLeod, our new reporter, Kat McLeod, with her first official report. And this is her journey to becoming a Skeptic Zone reporter. And it's a lesson on how important it is for we as skeptics to support the community and to attend skeptical events. Find out more with For Crying Out Loud, it's Kat McLeod. Following that, I catch up with my old buddy Ben Radford from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Ben is headed for Australia, so we chat about his upcoming trip to attend the Australian Skeptics National Convention and some of his other recent exploits. Of course, Ben is one of the hosts of that wonderful podcast, Squaring the Strange. Following that, it's the Book of Tim, and Tim will read a bit this week by Sir Jim R. Wallaby. Well, really, it was Barry Williams, the former editor of the magazine, who used to write under the name of Sir Jim. And this is an interesting article about energies unknown to science, or EUTS, or UTS, as we sometimes call them, which is very apt because on the 28th of this month, up in Bend, Oregon, I'll be giving a talk about energies unknown to science at the Trivia Night, or the Nerd Night, hosted by Brian Dunning. More details about that coming up in the show. Then to round everything off, we have the Trove segment, this week looking at the sixth sense. Say that 3 times quickly. Do you have a sixth sense? Well, I've heard... Where was it? I think it was on the QI program when Stephen Fry was hosting it, I think, saying that we do have more than 5 senses, depending on how you look at it, like the sense of balance. Here in California, spring is slowly drifting into summer, and more people have sneezes, snuffles and sneezes and things. If you're feeling a little unwell with the coughs and the colds and the sneezes and the flus at the moment, I'm thinking of you, and I hope you get better soon. As for me, I have to take the odd little bit of hay fever medication here. Nothing to sneeze at. Oh dear. Well, with that bad joke, it's time for me to run out the door, run around the corner, and maybe find myself a nice breakfast burrito. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone.
Crying out loud. It's Kat McLeod.
Hello, it's Kat McLeod coming to you from Kitty Corner Studios, located at latitude 53.5-ish in the Northern Hemisphere. You've likely heard me on this podcast over the last few months, chatting with the delightful Adrian Hill. But many of you may not know how I came to be on the Skeptic Zone. In May of 2023, I broke 3 years of living in isolation, as I'm one of those at high risk to die from COVID people. And I went to the Week in Reason conference in Calgary, Canada. The lineup of speakers and the chance to be around fellow skeptics was too much of a draw for me to miss, as for over 3 years, the only time I'd been near any gathering of people was at the dog park or in the hospital. I was nervous, but I knew I would be masked and sitting at a socially distant table. So I went. I plucked up some courage and also went to the pub night held on the Friday evening before the conference. As chance would have it, a charming gentleman who was running around the tables bending spoons asked if he could sit with us for the trivia round. Of course, we welcomed him. It was noisy, but I thought I recognized his voice. I didn't think much of it until the next day. That evening, we laughed, joked, created an origami deity named Colin, who became the answer to many of the biblical trivia questions, and ended up coming in a very respectable second place, losing by only 1 point to a team loaded with Seth Andrews and Aaron Raw. The next day was the conference. My table was to the back inside of the room, and it happened to be close to where some of the speakers were sitting, including my new friend from trivia the night before, Richard Saunders. I was a little bit gobsmacked when I discovered that it really was the man behind the voice that I had listened to so often on the Skeptic Zone, being my trivia teammate. He was a late addition to the speakers list, and I had no idea he would be there. During the breaks, I was able to chat with Adrienne Hill, and we became fast friends, bonding over the dangers of herbal remedies. I remember saying to her, "Don't get me started about the dangers of Cam." She should have heeded my warning, as I've talked more about it in the last year than I have in the last decade. After the conference, Adrienne and I kept in touch, and she asked if I would be willing to write up a piece for Skeptical Inquirer. She was submitting an article from an organizer, presenter, and attendee perspective about the Week in Reason conference. I jumped on the chance and got her a draft promptly. The piece was published online June 2nd, 2023. One day, Adrienne and I were chatting, and she mentioned a segment she was working on for the Skeptic Zone regarding hostage tape. We shared many giggles about the topic, and she asked if I wanted to help her with the piece. I followed her down that rabbit hole, and we had a blast. We recorded it multiple times for various reasons, and laughed more than I had in a very long time. I was thrilled when it aired on September 2nd, 2023, episode 778 of the Skeptic Zone. I figured that would be my one and only appearance on a podcast. Apparently, Adrienne had other plans, because she had been speaking with Richard, and they wanted me to tell my story on the Skeptic Zone. She asked if I would, and how could I refuse? So Adrienne interviewed me, and my story went out to the world on October 22nd, 2023, episode 785. Adrienne also encouraged me to write an article about my experiences with herbal remedies for Skeptical Inquirer. So I did. It was accepted and was published in Volume 47, Issue 6, the November-December 2023 issue. Since then, I've shared my experience on some other podcasts. This May, I was invited to be a speaker at the Week in Reason conference to talk about natural health products. I've been on the Skeptic Zone half a dozen more times, and then I was surprised on episode 813 when Richard announced that I was no longer an interloper, but an actual Skeptic Zone reporter. As my first assignment, I had to do something that can be a little awkward for me. That is, talk about myself. Richard seems to like putting me outside my comfort zone. So here we are, and the past year has been one that I never would have imagined. The decision to go to the conference has changed my life. My social circle has expanded. I've been interviewed for podcasts. I've been published in a respected magazine. And now I'm an official Skeptic Zone reporter. The power of our community is inspiring. Not only is it wonderful for our mental health to commune with like-minded people, but opportunities can arise from conversations. I highly recommend that if you're skeptical, you attend events like meetups, Skeptics in the Pub, skeptic camps, or even conventions and conferences. If you're passionate about a topic, you never know where the connections you make may take you. But for now, this is Kat McLeod, signing off from Kitty Corner Studios in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada.
Nerd Night in Bend, Oregon. Nerd Night in Bend, Oregon presents Science Trivia plus Strange Energies Unknown to Science by special guest Richard Saunders. When? Tuesday, May the 28th at 7 p.m. Bring your friends and join us for an extra special night of brainy merriment at the Poor House Grill in Bend, Oregon. First, we'll enjoy Strange Energies Unknown to Science. In this short presentation, special guest Richard Saunders, Chief Investigator of the Australian Skeptics and host of the popular podcast, The Skeptic Zone, will discuss some of the strange energies proposed by people over the decades. Do they live up to the hype? Then, put your nerdy knowledge to the test with our super popular science trivia. If you pay attention to the presentation, you'll automatically get 10 questions right. Whether you're a science enthusiast or just love a good challenge, this free in-person event is perfect for you. That's Nerd Night in Bend, Oregon, Tuesday, May the 28th at 7 p.m. at the Poor House Grill. And joining me now all the way from beautiful, oh my goodness me, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Folks, if you've not been to Albuquerque, you should. It's the one and only Ben Radford. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Richard. Great to chat with you.
Good to see you again, Ben. It's been a while. We haven't seen each other for a while, but good news. You're coming to Australia in November.
That's the rumor. I'm super excited about it. I've never been to Australia. It's been on my bucket list for decades, and I'm so glad to be coming out there to speak and see you all, and I'm just super excited about it.
It's wonderful news. Australia is an exciting place full of mysteries. I can promise you that. We have many, we have monsters, we have UFOs, we have all sorts of things that I'm sure once you've visited, Ben, because you're speaking at the Australian Skeptics National Convention, once you've come and you've seen Australia, you'll solve every mystery we've ever had.
I want to leave some for you all, so I'll do my best.
No, seriously, folks, this is one of the biggest draw cards we've had for quite a while at the Australian Skeptics National Convention. Ben Radford, the man who knows. He knows. You know Chupacabra personally, don't you?
Well, I wouldn't say personally or biblically for that matter, but I have spent quite a bit of time around the little beastie, mythical or otherwise.
And to name but a few, I mean, you've investigated everything from the Mothman to Chupacabra to... Do they have any big feet in your neck of the woods?
Well, do they have them here? A bit of a loaded question there. Technically, yes. The Bigfoot have been sighted in, I think, virtually every state. For a while, it was except Hawaii, but I think there's actually been a sighting or two in Hawaii. Now, how exactly the Bigfoot got to Hawaii is another question in and of itself, but yeah, we have some mountains here. It's the likelihood of Bigfoot existing in general is quite low, and it's extremely low here in the desert, let me tell you.
Well, Bigfoot gets to Hawaii by flying first class because of his big feet, right? He needs the extra room.
I assume so. I haven't been apprised of his travel arrangements, but it makes sense.
It makes sense. Now, folks, of course, you know that voice very well, Ben Radford, from this wonderful Squaring the Strange podcast. That's been going for quite a while now, Ben. How is that going?
It's going great, yeah. As always, we appreciate your mentioning it on your show. We have listeners all over the place. Yeah, we just celebrated 6 years, which surprises nobody more than me. Yes.
6 years. Just seems like yesterday you were ringing me up saying, Richard, how do you do a podcast?
Yes. Yeah, I remember I had a long list of questions. I remember talking with Celestian Pasquale. I'm like, well, the best one that we listen to is Richard's. And I want to ask him how to do a podcast. It would be embarrassing. How do you do this? But you very kindly gave us some tips and technical tips and other kinds. And I'm just grateful for listeners and audiences and supporters. So yes, still going strong.
Excellent news. It's a great podcast. But you hardly keep still, Ben Radford, apart from preparing to jet around the world to the other side of the planet to be upside down with the rest of us. What else is going on in the world, the strange world of Ben Radford?
The strange world. Well, there's a few things. I'm actually shortly off to Utah, where I'm speaking at a folklore conference. As you know, I love folklore, and we talk about it often on the show. And one of the reasons is because there's lots of elements of folklore that really are crossover with skepticism, critical thinking and urban legends and things like that. So I always enjoy meeting my folklore friends and sort of cross-pollinating, if you will. So I'll be speaking there, and the topic is the political chupacabra, of all things.
Who does chupacabra vote for heaven's sake? What do you mean, Ben?
Well, here's the thing. Oftentimes with monsters, as you know, they are sort of, they serve as boogeymen. They serve as social boogeymen, the whole there be dragons thing, right? And so oftentimes monsters are associated with demonization and the other, the capital O other. And in the case of the chupacabra, it was actually used for political purposes primarily in Mexico and also Puerto Rico, where there were politicians who were either cast as the chupacabra or used the chupacabra as a sort of external menace. There was one particular mayor who said, "If you vote for me, I'll protect you from the chupacabra." And I guess he was successful.
Wow. Well, it's like saying this substance I bought is an elephant repellent. Well, there are no elephants here. You see, it's working.
You see, exactly. You see how well it works. You're welcome. Vote for me.
Oh, just quickly, Ben, for those people listening out there who may be new to the show or new to cryptozoology, which was what we're talking about, really, the chupacabra is what?
Well, it's probably the second or third best-known monster in the world after Bigfoot or Nessie, depending on how you look at it. And one thing that really strikes me is it's a vampire. Bigfoot's not a vampire. The Yowie not a vampire. Mothman's not a vampire. But the chupacabra is specifically a vampire because it's said to suck the blood out of goats and chickens and things like that. So it's primarily cited and discussed in Latin America. And it's said to still exist. And there are many people who believe in it.
And folks, the book you need to read, of course, is Chasing the Chupacabra by Ben Radford. And again, Ben, you don't sit still for a moment. There's a big meeting, which we mentioned last week on the show, coming up in your neck of the woods in Albuquerque.
Yes, indeed. Due partly to the great Susan Gerbich's prodding, haranguing, pick whatever description you like. She said, you all should do a skeptic camp. And we said, okay. So sure enough, through sheer force of will, which is how Susan gets things done, we will be having a skeptic camp here in Albuquerque, New Mexico on June 1st and 2nd. And I'm speaking there, and we will have Brian Dunning and Celestial will be there, and Dave Thomas and a handful of other skeptics. So it'll be a fun weekend of skeptical talks and camaraderie and fun stuff, and people can just show up. There's no fee. You don't need to register. Just show up.
Sounds great. And as we like to say, it's a day full of skeptical stars and Brian Dunning.
That's how I like to say. I always get the side eye when from Brian, but yes, that's how I like to phrase it. Yes.
Someone told me, a little bird or a little UFO or a monster told me you were recently on the BBC, Ben.
I was. I've been on a couple of times. Most recently, it was a BBC podcast series called BBC Uncanny. And it was hosted by a guy named Danny Robbins. And apparently, to be honest with it, I'd only sort of vaguely heard about it. But it's based in most of the audiences in the UK. But they recently were branching out into here in the States. And as part of that, they had a series of Uncanny US. And I was asked to give skeptical commentary on a ghost report. It's a detailed case. I don't have time to go into it, but it was a curious case where a man in the South had used a Ouija board. As we all know, those, at least in horror films, are the gateway to the other side. Not so much in real life, but whatever. And anyway, he used a Ouija board, and he believed that he had been visited by, well, that's the question. A ghost, a neighbor, who knows? So I unfortunately was not able to interview the actual witness, a guy named Marcus, which I was hoping to. Instead, I was asked to sort of, here's my interview with him. what sort of, how would a skeptic approach this? And I raised a few questions like, well, if one wanted to solve this case, he said advisedly, this is what one might do. So it was fun. It was interesting.
So people can easily find that appearance online, Ben?
Yes. Again, it's BBC Uncanny Podcast. The most recent is Uncanny US. And yeah, it's a case in South Georgia about 20 years ago. So yeah, it shouldn't be hard to find. To be honest with you, I was sort of the typical, skeptic is brought in at the last minute to try and explain away, a whole thing in a few sentences. But I think it turned out well.
Well, I think we should all take these opportunities when they arise, even though when we see the finished result, it's somewhat deflating, but still we try our best. Ben, again, we can't wait to see you in Australia. The Australian Skeptics National Convention coming up in Sydney, very exciting, and you'll be there to put our fears to rest. And after your visit, we won't be scared of the Yowie anymore.
I'll do my best. It's a tall order, but if nothing else, at least I can probably raise a pint with you all.
Yeah, we can't wait. Now, Ben, how can people find out more about what you do?
What I do and where I am? Well, there's a couple places. Probably most prominently, I am a columnist and deputy editor for Skeptical Inquirer Science Magazine and have been for 25 years now. I also post on Facebook and on Twitter. And yeah, if you can find some of my books floating around here and there, and of course on Squaring the Strange podcast. Of
course. Ben Radford, all the way there in Albuquerque, and how fondly I remember my all too brief visit. You took a photograph of me on the highway, I think it was probably Route 66 or something, leading out of Albuquerque, and when we looked at the photograph later, there was a UFO behind me, wasn't there?
I remember that well. It was, as is usually the case, we didn't see it at the time. So make of that what you will.
Make of that what you will. Ben Radford, thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. Great to talk to you.
Bigfoot, UFOs, quackery, ghosts, moral panic, and more. Skeptic Camp, New Mexico, presented by New Mexicans for Science and Reason. Save the date and plan to join New Mexicans for Science and Reason for the inaugural Skeptic Camp to be held on June 1st and 2nd, 2024. The main conference will take place at CNM's Workforce Training Center at 5600 Eagle Rock Avenue, Northeast Albuquerque. Social events will also take place the preceding evening and throughout the weekend. Come for the talks, stay for the community. Speakers include the Skeptic Zone's own Adrian Hill, Skeptoid's Brian Dunning. From Squaring the Strange, we have Celestia Ward and Ben Radford. Physicist and mathematician Dave Thomas. KRQE News 13 investigative reporter Larry Barker. Kennedy Center scientist Frank Etzkorn. Archaeologist Curly Trapawawa. And me, Susan Gerbic from GSOW. Meet like-minded friends, old and new. Ask challenging questions. Heckle Brian Dunning in public. Skeptic Camp, New Mexico, presented by New Mexicans for Science and Reason. For all the details, head to www.skepticampnm.com or follow this link in the week's show notes. See you there.
And now, a reading from the Book of Tim with Tim Mendham.
Hi, my name is Tim Mendham. I'm the Executive Officer of Australian Skeptics Inc. and I'm the editor of our magazine, The Skeptic. And today I'm reading from the magazine from an article that appeared in The Skeptic December 2018, which is volume 38, number 4. Well, the article is called The History of Utes, EUTS, which stands for Energies Unknown to Science. Now, a few points of clarification here. Utes is not to be confused with the Australian abbreviation of a utility vehicle, something used by tradesmen. And you'll have to note that this article is written by Sir Jim R. Wallaby. Now, Sir Jim was a cantankerous old person who liked to put rude comments in his article all the way through, but In reality, it was Barry Williams wrote it, who was the past president and executive officer of Australian Skeptics, who was a cantankerous old fellow who liked to put rude comments in his article, and this one he still does. He also refers to myself in a much younger incarnation because the article originally appeared in 1990, and at that stage I was a younger, thinner and more obsequious than I am today. So I'll read on The History of Utes by Sir Jim Wallaby / Barry Williams. A few weeks ago I was engaged in quiet discourse with our respected editor, that's me, on matters pertaining to the production of this journal. "Sir," he said to me, "I like young Mendham. He is obsequious without being servile. Would you please be so kind as to write an article pointing out the incompatibility of the paranormal with well-tested and fundamental laws of physics?" Not wishing to disappoint the lad, I responded, "Of course, my boy, ever mindful of my monograph on Heisenstein's relatively uncertain principle, which is still discussed in hushed tones whenever Nobel laureates gather." At this point, our friendly tete-a-tete was interrupted by the intrusion of the grizzled visage of one Williams, that's Barry Williams, who, for reasons that completely mystify me, presides over our inquiring little group. Fixing me with that benevolent gaze that has made his name a byword at reunions of SS members, he delivered himself with the following tirade. "What do you know about the fundamental laws of physics, you silly old fool? You are undecided about Heisenberg. You don't know whether Schrödinger's Moggy was Burmese or Ali. You think that Planck's constant is the carpenter's rule. And you believe that quantum mechanics are the blokes who keep the flying kangaroo flying." Now, for your information, that's reference to Qantas Airlines, which has a flying kangaroo as a symbol. Not wishing to dignify this intemperate outburst with a reply, I took my leave. Despite all, however, the oaf's vituperation had caused a niggling doubt to fester in my mind. Could I possibly carry out my task without first undergoing a 2-week crash course in particle physics? I confessed to myself that I was indeed a trifle rusty on the Copenhagen interpretation, and that superstring theory posed some knotty problems. On the other hand, could I disappoint the trusting Mendham? The horns of a dilemma indeed. I was even contemplating the only way out for a man of honour: drink. Little did I realise it, but salvation was at hand. Sheltering from the rain in the literary emporium of the estimable Eve Abbey, that was Abbey's bookshop, my eye lighted upon a slim volume entitled A Physicist's Guide to Skepticism by Milton A. Rothman. The subtitle was what really attracted my notice: Applying Laws of Physics to Faster-than-Light Travel, Psychic Phenomena, Telepathy, Time Travel, UFOs, and Other Pseudo-Scientific Claims, it read. Aha, I mused. If this Professor Rothman knows his stuff, then my problem is solved. The appalling Williams, who was lurking in a neighbouring aisle perusing some Victorian art studies, muttered something about plagiarism is a crime, but summing up all the innate dignity with which centuries of noble breeding has endowed me, I left him to his own devices. The book, as it transpires, fulfills all of the hopes I had for it. It seems that Professor Rothman, a retired physics professor from Trenton State College, New Jersey, does indeed know his stuff. More importantly, he expounds his knowledge with a clarity which should enlighten even those whose scientific knowledge barely exceeds the combined output of the creation science cult. The book begins by asking the questions we frequently hear being asked by those who, in the interests of democracy, seem to believe that all propositions are equally valid. How do you know that we can't travel faster than light? How do you know telepathy is impossible, etc.? It then goes on to show that while science does not know the answers to every question, this does not mean that science does not know the answer to any question. He also challenges the view that any scientific theory is provisional and subject to complete overthrow in the future. Rothman points out that it took a revolution in thinking for us to accept the idea that the Earth is a spheroid and that it revolves around the Sun, but questions whether there is any conceivable case for a further revolution which will overturn our present state of knowledge of this topic. Refinements in any theory are always possible, perhaps probable, but the total reversal of many of our established scientific models is inconceivable. Rothman examines the various conservation laws that lie at the heart of nature. Not, I hasten to add, the laws conserving trees or buildings, all of which are subject to the whims of politicians, but those that govern the conservation of energy, momentum, and such like. He considers these under two headings: laws of permission, which allow but do not guarantee certain effects, and laws of denial, which absolutely forbid certain events. This is a very useful tool and is the basis upon which we can use the law of conservation of energy to reject the idea of a perpetual motion machine without actually having to test every example that is presented. An interesting practical example of this is the blanket refusal of the US Patent Office to even consider perpetual motion machines for the granting of a patent. This may also be one of the few recorded cases of a bureaucracy making an intelligent decision. He examines the four fundamental interactions which control all actions at the atomic level and shows that if we test and validate our assumptions about the laws against the interactions, we can make predictions with a remarkable degree of confidence that we then do not have to test every example. For instance, it has been experimentally shown that events that are mediated by the strong nuclear and electromagnetic interactions obey the law of conservation of energy to within a few parts per 1,000 million. If our leaders could determine their forward estimates with that degree of precision, they could calculate the budget exactly to within an accuracy of 6 decimal places. Bring on the quantum politicians, I say. Rothman puts it another way: if you were a typist with a similar standard of accuracy and you could keep up a speed of 100 words per minute, you could type for 20 million years without making a mistake. And as the editor, me, I added, if anyone knows a typist like that, could they please contact me? Williams/Wallaby continues, Rothman shows that electromagnetism is the only one of the 4 fundamental interactions that could, by the nature of the claims made, conceivably be responsible for the majority of claimed paranormal phenomena. He then goes on to show that the fundamental laws, in fact, make the claims impossible. He does not deny that other forces may as yet be detected, but shows that if they do indeed exist, then they must fall within very clearly defined parameters, which makes it highly improbable that any such undiscovered forces could account for dubious phenomena. Such forces may be found to operate in extremely high energy states, which means very hot, such as those pertaining nanoseconds after the Big Bang. It is unlikely that we will ever be able to simulate these conditions in laboratories, and the temperatures required far exceed those that exist in today's real world, even in the fevered brains of new ages. Alternatively, other forces may remain undiscovered, simply because they are so weak as to get lost in the background noise and thus have no discernible effect on matter. Now, Rothman gets to the nub of the matter. It is all very well to postulate new forces, energies, or particles. Scientists quite often do it, as the case of the neutrino exemplifies. Certain actions which occurred within quantum experiments indicated the need for such a particle to make the maths come out right. It took 20 years before experimental evidence showed that the neutrino actually existed. Similarly, with the intermediate vector bosons, which were postulated as the mediating particles of the weak nuclear force, and which were not actually observed for many years. In these and other cases, theory predicted just what researchers should have looked for, and by looking, they found them. But what of energies unknown to science? That's where the Utes come in. What of psychic energy or orgone energy or whatever which we are told account for phenomena such as telepathy or precognition? To answer this question, we must first ask, where is the body of experimental evidence that requires us to postulate these energies or particles? Where are the consistent theories that give us an indication of what to look for? The answer is, of course, there are none. All we see are inconsistent experiments giving inconsistent and vague results and a whole lot of wishful thinking. As Rothman has it, there is no requirement to explain a phenomenon unless you have evidence that the phenomenon exists. Or, as one of our patrons, Dick Smith, was wont to say, I really don't need to know how Santa's reindeer fly until I know that Santa's reindeer do fly. It is clear that we know enough about the real material world to be confident that no known forces can produce alleged psychic phenomena. The proposition that is usually advanced to counter this is some hypothetical non-material energy which exists on some plane other than the material. Rothman is aware of this cop-out and exposes its most glaring flaw. You can postulate as many paramaterial planes as you wish, but at some stage in the proceedings, there must be an interface between the paramaterial force and the material electrons in the material brain, or nothing will be detected and nothing will happen. Consider two worldviews, each seemingly incomprehensible to the lay mind. On the one hand, we have quantum theory, which is so counterintuitive as to be inexplicable by analogy and thus to be incomprehensible to non-specialists. A theory about which Niels Bohr, one of its founders, is reported to have said, "If you're not confused by quantum mechanics, then you have not understood the proposition." Yet quantum theory allows us to predict events with an accuracy almost unique in our history and is directly responsible for our entire electronics technology. Quantum theory is the most powerful explanation of the natural world that we have. On the other hand, we have psychic theory, also inexplicable in ordinary terms, but for different reasons. Psychic theory is inexplicable because there is nothing to explain. The predictive ability of psychic theory is precisely zero. And until we have some concrete evidence that any such phenomena exist, that is precisely where it will remain. Reading Professor Rothman's book should convince any reasonably intelligent individual that it would be inadvisable to suspend one's respiration while waiting for that evidence. And that's The History of Utes by Sir Jimar Wallaby / Barry Williams that appeared in the Skeptic magazine in December 2018. And you can download a copy of that issue from our website, skeptics.com.au. Go to the magazine tab and virtually all of our magazines are available to download for free, except the four most recent ones, in which case you will have to subscribe. Poor you. Never mind, it's worth it.
Hejsan alla svenskar som lyssnar på The Skeptic Zone podcast. Det här är Pontus Böckman från The ESP, The European Skeptics Podcast. När ni har lyssnat klart på alla inslag och intervjuer här på The Skeptic Zone så kanske ni har lust att kolla vad som händer på The ESP. Ni hittar oss på theesp.eu där man finner skeptiska nyheter och inslag ur ett europeiskt perspektiv. Vi ses där!
Here we go, once again, back into the archives, back into the pages of digitized newspapers from around the world. Our first port of call is normally Trove at trove.nla.gov.au, but we often go further afield. And as I have been doing lately, I've been going to the State Library of New South Wales and digging through the archives of the Sydney Morning Herald and the Sun Herald. Now, I put in various search terms like clairvoyance or ESP or psychics or, that sort of thing. And I happened to put in Sixth Sense. And I found an interesting article from 1981 which trails over a couple of weeks because they ask for feedback from readers. Now, these items appeared in the Sun Herald starting on the 9th of August 1981. Sixth Sense, How the Future is Predicted. We often hear personal accounts of premonitions or telepathy, experiences too strange to be explained by coincidence. They add up to the possibility that we all have a sixth sense, which we don't know how to control. But scientific evidence is hard to come by. Nancy Berryman reports on two Australian scientists who believe they are on the track of the sixth sense. We give you the chance to test yourself. Case 1. A New South Wales woman predicted the death of Sir Robert Menzies. Now, Sir Robert Menzies was a very long-serving Prime Minister here in Australia. She not only got the date right, but also the headlines and the day and weather of his funeral. Now that's all it says. It doesn't go on to tell us any details about this case, so who knows. Case 2. A week before the Sydney Rugby League Grand Final between Parramatta and St George, 1977, 6 people simultaneously dreamt it would be the first draw in history. I see. Case 3. A young American student predicted there would be an air crash outside a major population centre in the Northern Hemisphere on March 11, 1979, killing 46 people. He was almost right. In fact, there was an air crash on March 14 outside Doha, capital of Qatar, on the Persian Gulf, and 45 people were killed. Except that only 2 of the above cases could be described as premonitions. The first 2 were reported before the events to Melbourne ESP researcher Dr. Charles Osborne by people who made no claim to be clairvoyant. The third was all done by statistics. A young master's degree student simply went over all the air crashes for the past 30 years to work out the dates and details most likely to be disastrous. Do statistical exercises like that make Dr. Osborne feel like giving up? Not a bit of it. A senior lecturer in physics at the Caulfield Institute of Technology, Victoria, he will be the first to admit it's not easy being a psychic explorer, especially if you are trained like him to be professionally skeptic. First of all, there are hostile colleagues to deal with. Their attitude may be summed up by a Sydney lecturer in physics whose only comment about ESP research was, "I don't know anyone who takes it seriously enough to go beyond saying more than one word, bunk." Not surprisingly, there are very few people researching ESP in Australia, and none in Sydney. The cause has not been helped by some fraudulent researchers whose bizarre claims for ESP include astral travel, where people may one day leave their bodies and visit other planets, sending messages via telepathy, a boom for spies, and influencing computers through mental processes. It's even been speculated that psychiatrists might be able to help use ESP to look into a patient's mind. But the most difficult problem facing serious scientific researchers is much more down to earth: how to distinguish ESP from mere chance. For instance, how many people have dreams that someone close has died, only to find it comes true? That's the kind of experience Dr. Osborne would tend to call coincidence. I'll stop here quickly to say there's an interesting take on this phenomena in Brian Dunning's movie Here Be Dragons, which is on YouTube. He calls it the law of very large numbers. Too good. What stops him from dismissing all such premonitions as coincidence is an example like the Melbourne woman who predicted the death of Sir Robert Menzies, and all those people dreaming of a grand final draw. That kind of coincidence is too good, says Dr. Osborne. There's also spoon bending, popularized by Uri Geller, who now seems to have been discredited. But that's irrelevant according to Dr. Osborne. The phenomenon is genuine. He has proof in the shape of a horseshoe bent by the mind of a 15-year-old boy of average intelligence from a middle-class background. For the sake of a simple life, he'd much prefer that such cases didn't exist. But the evidence for ESP is too strong to ignore, he says. The only problem is proving it. That's where statistics can work for, as well as against ESP researchers, like enabling them to work out the probability of a prediction, like an air crash being fulfilled. If the prediction date turned out to be a particularly likely one for air crashes, Dr. Osborne says he would be careful to interpret a prediction as ESP. But premonitions, in his experience, are fairly rare, and not very reliable at that. Nor should they be confused with predictions made by professional clairvoyants. I've looked at professional clairvoyant predictions and find they're particularly poor, to say the least, Dr. Osborne says. And there's a little paragraph here on this page. which will lead us to the next couple of weeks. It says, tell us of your experiences. Have you ever read someone else's mind, accurately predicted an unlikely event, moved something with the power of your mind? Write and tell us about it. We'll check your case history with the scientists who are investigating the sixth sense, and in a few weeks we'll publish the most interesting stories. Write to The Sixth Sense, Sun Herald, Box 506, GPO Sydney, New South Wales, 2001. And the next part of this story says, you may be an ESP whiz. Here's a test. At noon today, our reporter Nancy Berryman will choose 5 cards from a normal pack and think about them for 5 minutes. Can you read her mind? Between noon and 12:05 p.m., concentrate on numbers and suits of cards. If any clearly come to mind, write them down. Keep what you have written till next Sunday. In next Sunday's Sun Herald, we will publish the cards chosen by Nancy Berryman and the probability of guessing them by sheer chance. If you do better than chance, you could have a powerful sixth sense. Well, why don't I play along with this all these years later, 43 years later. I have a packet of cards here. Give them a nice shuffle, and we'll choose 5 at random. First card is the 9 of Diamonds. Second card, the 2 of Diamonds. Third card, the 10 of Hearts, all red so far. Fourth card, the 4 of Diamonds. What are the odds of picking 4 red cards, I wonder? And the 5th card, the 3 of Diamonds. Well, they were just randomly picked from a shuffled deck, so they've got the same chances of any other sequence coming out. I check my deck here, and it's a mixture of red and black. So anyway, they're my cards. Later on, we'll see if any matched. Now, I know that wasn't the object of the test, but unless we can suppose that I can telepathically hook up with something that happened over 40 years ago, I think that's as good as we can do. This paragraph goes on. You might also like to test yourself in another way. Hold a pack of cards face down and try to guess the suit of each one before you turn it over. If chance alone was operating, you'd be expecting to guess correctly the suits of about 13 of the 52 cards. The chance of correctly guessing more than 28 is 1 in 100,000. He regards clairvoyants as either good newspaper readers or trained analysts. That is, they're fairly well informed and make educated guesses. His research has mainly been concerned with exploring telepathy using Ganzfield. And the accompanying photograph on the page, Dr. Charles Osborne conducting an experiment in telepathy using the Ganzfield method. The subject is blindfolded and static is played through earphones to eliminate distractions. Ganzfield is one of the 3 methods, the others being hypnosis and drugs, used to produce the quiet mind deemed necessary. The subject is lulled into a daydream state by covering the eyes with ping-pong balls and softly playing radio static through earphones to eliminate distracting sounds. People must realize, says Dr. Osborne, that telepathy is a bad channel at the moment. The best results I've had is 48% accuracy, so there's little hope of using telepathy for spying. You lose 1 word in 2. He hastens to add that it wasn't his idea to use telepathy for spying. He'd rather not speculate about ESP. It only gives his scientific opponents more ammunition. But he will say his experiments appear to support the notion of psychokinesis, the ability to influence objects by mental processes. And it also might affect scientific experiments, he says. how many of them might be due to wishful thinking on the part of the experimenter? I just say that to stir my scientific friends. He adds tongue-in-cheek. He hardly need bother. The mere mention of ESP raises orthodox scientific hackles. Terry McMullen, senior lecturer in psychology at the University of Sydney, is scathing about premonitions. How is it possible to be aware of something that has never occurred? There can't even be any question of doing any research on that. He says, well, I would disagree with him there, but you'd have to be very careful about your protocols. Psychokinesis and telepathy are at least investigatable. But so far there's been no significant outcome of any experiments, according to him. If I feel I could influence something by an act of mind, I would get a group of people and go down to Rest Point Casino and stand around the table willing the red or black to come up on the roulette wheel. I could be a millionaire, but I've never heard of any psychokinesis able to do anything like that. ESP is also an area that opens itself up to trickery, he says. It's very easy for people such as university lecturers to be fooled by people like Uri Geller if they don't know the tricks of the trade. What's needed is someone who's a skilled professional magician to work alongside them. But some critics can't stop Dr. Osborne or Dr. Harvey Irwin, who teaches psychology at the University of New England, Armidale. Dr. Irwin continues to pursue research into out-of-body experiences in spite of its effects on his professional career. Scientists allege that ESP research is inconsequential, when a lot of things we believe in science are equally hard to test, says Dr. Irwin. Surgery. They should look at the phenomenon itself instead of taking a stand and saying it can't happen. His research shows that out-of-body experiences are most common in situations where the person is meditating, immediately before going to sleep or immediately after waking, or just before the accident where people report seeing themselves slamming into a truck and observing people running to help them. Surgery is another situation which often inspires out-of-body experiences, but experiments so far to try to produce similar experiences in a laboratory situation have been very weak, Dr. Irwin says. But one element which appears to play an important part in out-of-body experiences is a psychological characteristic known as absorption, the ability of some people to be totally involved in what they are looking at or thinking of. His research also indicates that out-of-body experiences flow from a special state of consciousness, akin to hypnosis or meditation, which is conducive to ESP. One of his subjects has had a series of out-of-body experiences, the first when she was a girl of 8 sitting on a swing. Suddenly she found herself looking down at herself on the swing, jumping off and landing safely on the ground. The feeling was one of serenity, safety, and detachment. If I was backed into a corner, my inclination would be to say a good deal of it is hallucinatory, but I think the element of ESP is very convincing, says Dr. Irwin. All right, and I know you're all dying to know what the 5 cards were after all these years, so we skip ahead 1 week to the 16th of August 1981 in the Sun Herald. 6th sense, it's all in the mind. We've had a fascinating response to our request last week for people to write about uncanny experiences they've had. We'll publish some of your stories next week. Can't wait. Meanwhile, we want to hear more experiences like fortune-telling, the future, and reading minds. Write to 6th Sense, Sun Herald, Box 506, GPO, Sydney, 2001. We asked you to test your ESP powers by trying to read the mind of our reporter, Nancy Berryman. Last Sunday at noon, she chose 5 cards from a normal pack and concentrated on them for 5 minutes. Were you able to sense what the cards were? Here they are. She chose 2 of spades. Nope. 2 of diamonds. Yes. How about that? 4 of spades. Nope. 7 of hearts? Nope. And 9 of hearts? Nope. So, purely by random shuffling, after 43 years, I had 1 out of the 5 cards. It goes on, the probability of you picking none of these correctly is 590 in 1,000. 1 correct is 343 in 1,000. 2 correct is 62 in 1,000. 3 correct is 4 in 1,000. And getting 4 correct is 1 in 1,000. Only 4 people in the whole population of Australia would be likely to get 5 cards correct by chance. If you've done better than 4 cards, don't contact us. Contact Dr. Charles Osborne, Senior Lecturer in Physics at the Caulfield Institute of Technology, 900 Dandenong Road, Caulfield, Victoria 3145. In fact, if you've done that well, you probably don't need a letter or a phone to communicate with Dr. Osborne. And indeed, in the next issue on the 23rd of August 1981, we have three letters, something like that, from readers, 3 or 4 relaying their so-called psychic experiences or premonitions, which basically boil down to stories. So I don't think we'll bother to cover those. You can always research similar things yourself. So there we are. Now, I think I might look more into Dr. Charles Osborne and his experiments in a future episode of the Skeptic Zone. It sounds very interesting stuff, and I'm pretty sure I've got material about his work somewhere in my archives, but I'll see what I can find out. But of course, if you go to your own archives, like I do from time to time, or online to somewhere like Trove, and do a little bit of research, well, you never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast, and a big thank you to my new Patreon subscribers just in the last week or so. Much appreciated. Your contributions are much appreciated, or muchly appreciated. If it wasn't for people like you and the other people who contribute to the show, there would be no Skeptic Zone. Coming up next week in the Trove segment, I think, if I can look into the future, I think we're going to be looking at fortune tellers. How fortunate for us. And maybe I'll go looking for a Bigfoot up in Oregon. Stay tuned to find out. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Oakland, California.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for episodes and show notes with links going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone on Facebook, X, TikTok and YouTube by clicking the links at our homepage, together with links to support the show financially via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily those of the Skeptic Zone podcast or any other skeptical organisation.
Hello to those people who listen after the music for the dice game. This is the after party, the extra bit, the Easter egg, and this is where we can all test our psychic predicting powers. I've got a 10-sided die here in a little sort of cup device. I'm going to roll it 3 times, maybe 4. People who know this segment know exactly what's going to happen, and you have to use your magical powers or your dumb luck to guess or see into the future what numbers are going to come up. So here we go. Roll 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Today's first number is 9. 9. Okay, next number. Here it comes. Guess away. 5. There you are, Susan Gobeck. One for you. 9, 5. Next number. 2. Today's numbers are 9, 5, and 2. And here comes the supplementary, the extra number. 2. I wonder if that says something mystical about the universe.